viewers, and welcome to the Art with World. I am your host, WAHEED. Today our guest is Dr. Khurshid Hassnain, who has a distinguished career in fields of science and art. He is a fascinating poet, short story writer and novelist, and his family has a long tradition of literary work starting from Maulana Altaf Hussain Hali and Khwaja Ahmad Abbas, who was a famous short story writer and screenplay writer as well. He is currently an advisor to the OIC Standing Committee on Scientific and Technological Cooperation, Islamabad. Prior to his current service, he has served as the Dean of Natural Sciences, Professor and Chairman of Physics Department at Qatar University, Islamabad. He was awarded Presidential Award of Pride of Performance 2001 and the Stara Imtiaz 2014 from the Government of Pakistan, and has been a Senior Associate of the International Center for Theoretical Physics. Welcome to our show, Khurshid Sahab. How are you?
Thank you very much, Arshad. Thank you for your kind introduction.
You have an illustrious career of working both in the fields of science and art and literature. But before I put up any question, I would like you to reflect upon your earlier interest in literature, how it developed and how it grew over time.
Well, as I look back, of course, my family background, you mentioned my great-grandfather, Maulana Hali, and my maternal uncle, Khwaja Ahmad Abbas. And of course, there were echoes of that in the family because several of my elders pursued careers in education or in arts and literature, influenced by these Hali and others. But another factor in my family was my father, who was a scientist as well as very well-read in all the literature and languages. So we had this, this combination of science as well as literature, which was our household had, tons of books of literature as well as art and paintings and stuff. So I was exposed to it from a very early age. Secondly, also I had the advantage of traveling from a very early age. My father was working in Libya at that time, so we had to travel, and in those days it was ship travel. So you can imagine the experience.
And what's this time about?
I'm talking now about the early 60s.
Okay.
This particular travel. And so then of course we traveled back, and we traveled through Europe and on to UK and so on, and then back to Pakistan. And then again we continued from here. But so it was I would say it's a formative experience. I learned English at a very early stage because of that. So now if I come to specifically writing and the interest, I suppose, a very voracious reader in English particularly. I mean, I can tell you that I had read a lot of short stories particularly. I mean, after reading, this stuff which is common for youngsters, the A.G. Wells and the Robert Louis Stevenson and Kipling and so on, I had moved on to my father's library and grabbed the Somerset Maugham, for example, or Maupassant kind of stuff. So the first thing I remember writing was in that time there used to be in Jung newspaper a student's page.
Yes.
So my sister was already writing, and she is now also a well-known poetess as well as writer. So she was already writing for that newspaper, and so I was really, I think, sort of envied the attention that it brought her, and I tried my hand. So a small, I could say, satirical essay. But then I think the first serious thing I wrote was in class 9th. And this was the school magazine. It was like a quarterly magazine, the first thing I remember. And I wrote a critique of Somerset Maugham.
Well, at that time, at the age of 9, at the age of when you were in 9th class.
9th class, yes. Yeah. And they were quite surprised. I was a very reticent kind of a person, and I still am rather, I suppose, aloof in some ways. So they didn't know much about me and what my my interests were. So it was a kind of a very important step, I would say, in my life. My teachers took me under their wing and sort of said that, you know, you can write. And also at this time, in class 9th, I discovered really Urdu literature. I mean, at home we had been groomed in poetry to some extent. We were told to memorize the Musaddas-e-Hali. I think I memorized like 20 pages or so. I was awarded a rupee per page by my father. So it was
a good incentive.
It was at that time a rupee had meant something, you know. And so also Iqbal, we were taught, you know, Iqbal. So I had that background. But it never really, you know, I never really looked into Urdu literature till that time. And then, as you know, in those, maybe you do, maybe you don't, in those days, the school texts in Urdu.
Yeah, they were very rich in
They were
literature.
very rich, as you said, yes. I mean, it was not, they were not distinguishing between writers from this part or that part of subcontinent or this religion or that religion. And we had Prem Chand, and we had Krishan Chandra, and we had Bedi, and we had, of course, we had Nadeem Qasmi, and they really moved me. I mean, and then there was poetry, of course. So that was a very formative 2 years of school, 9th and 10th.
Which school was that?
That's Habib Public School in Karachi. I learned, I was encouraged to participate in debates, and so I opened up. And we had this, you know, as I told you, our family background was kind of radicalized us from a very early age in a certain way. I mean, we were, you could say, progressives or leftists from a very early stage. We were Democrats from a very early stage. We were the only family in the house, in the neighborhood, the Pakistan Times used to be bought at the time when it was still. And so the newspaper vendor told my father that your name is on the CID list because you're the only one who subscribes to.
Well, at that time, it was nationalized, or it was?
It was before, I think it was nationalized. That was the time of Faisab and, you know, others. And then, of course, it was nationalized, and that's a different, you know, word. But I was just telling you that my father had this, and so we inherited that democratic spirit and, you know, progressive spirit. So the first speech that I gave in Habib Public, there was this tradition there. On Fridays, I think after the Jummah, it was a full day school, 9 to 5. So after the Friday prayers, the principal would call us in the dining hall, and he would describe something happening, and then he could pick anyone in the audience and say, come up and speak spontaneously. There was no preparation, nothing. And I had met him that morning for something else. So maybe my face was still fresh in his mind. I tried to hide behind the others, but he picked me out and roared in his, you know, bellowing voice, Khurshid. And so I had no choice but to timidly, I tiptoed to the stage. But somehow when I got there, you know, all that bottled up emotion and, you know, all those feelings about, it was the Vietnam War era. So I spoke about it very passionately. And again, he was just amazed that this very quiet kind of fellow has all these feelings. So that was again a turning point. And then, of course, we went on to college, and then that was the era of Bhutto Sahab and all that.
Before I come to your college days, I would like, you had just referred that you used to remember Musaddas-e-Hali. So any other influences of coming from family of Altaf Hussain Hali on your family or education? Or
definitely. I mean, as I listened to my mother, who of course was the granddaughter of Hali's daughter, Maulana Hali had a profound influence, not only on the family but on the city of Panipat itself. And not only did he, you know, not only was he a poet, but he was also, you could say, a social reformer, and he encouraged education not only for males but females. So he established the school there, which was I think till class 8th at least, which was a pretty big thing in those days for females, and our family females used to attend that school, and they used to bring out their own small weekly kind of a newsletter or something. So that you could say, could see that influence started there. And then of course my uncle Abbas and others who are not as well known in Pakistan, they stayed back in India. Uh, they they went towards, you could say, the progressive stream, but the literary aspect, the poetic aspect continued in different ways for different people. And I think even those of us who came to Pakistan, we take pride in the fact, and different ways they have exhibited their commitment. For example, Arif Hassan is a well-known architect and a social, you could say, architect, takes care of communities. Arif is from a family as well. And
he's your cousin?
He was, his father and my mother were cousins, you could say. So we like second or third cousins. And so there are other people. So that, that is always there. People, we think of ourselves as part of a tradition, you could say.
Do you remember something about Khaja Ahmad Abbas? You have met him sometime, because I think he was a fascinating short story writer, and the films he has produced, particularly the first script he wrote about Nicha Nagar, which was produced in Lahore, I guess, and that is based on Gorky's novel Lower Depths. So, if you had met him sometime?
Certainly. I'm afraid the last time I met him was during my sister's marriage in Pakistan in early 70s. I left for the States in 77, and after that we did communicate with letters a few times. When he discovered that I was writing, he was delighted. In fact, I think I still have somewhere in my home. When he received a couple of my poems, he wrote a column about it in the Blitz. He used to write the last page of Blitz. So he chose to show that, even though my sister is in Pakistan and this is her son, and look at the words, they were Hindi words. I'm really fond of using Hindi words in my poetry. So he was very happy to see that that idiom was continuing. So when I returned to Pakistan, at the time he was quite ill, and he urged me to come and visit him, but I'm afraid I just had too many things occupying me, and it's just like 86 now I'm talking about. And I failed there, as in many other things, and I couldn't visit him. We did visit him often in my childhood, his house by the Juhu beach. It's a delightful memory, running from his house to the beach and, coming back filled with sand and with taking the coconut, juice, etc. Juhu was a very beautiful beach at that time.
No, we come to very vibrant decades of 60s and 70s when you were a student, and in addition to your literary activities, you participated in students' union elections as well. So, would you tell us what was the environment of the campuses, the students' colleges at that time, and how did you enter into this social and political activities in addition to your literary activities? I guess you used to write for some literary magazine as well. Are you used to publish that?
Yes, but it was, let me take it from the start. When I entered the university in 1971, I guess, or late 71.
Very crucial year.
Yes, and the war occurred, and I think I wrote one of my earliest poems, a kind of a dirge, if you wish, on the war and its devastation. I was never the flag waving type, I'm afraid. So when I went to the university, and there was at that time Radio Pakistan was a very vibrant institution.
Was Zaid Bukhari there at that time?
I think probably he had left by this time, but I'm not sure, because our interaction, was at the student level, and there was this Bazme Talaba, you could say a student forum, And this was a nurturing place, nursery for a lot of people who went on to become well-known producers in PTV and other places.
Yeah.
They're all from this. I can name so many. So I used to participate in the programs, and there I had an encounter with now the well-known anchor Mujahid Barelvi, if you know. So Mujahid had heard me probably recite one of my poems, and he probably realized that I was the kind of person who he was looking to form a group of writers and poets, younger youth. So actually, I was lured into the student politics through literature,
Okay.
and not the other way around. So I began to be, involved in the literary activities, as well as then with the student politics of the NSF and at that time. And but mostly, I was very, you could say, studious kind of. I took my studies very seriously, and was studying physics. So you had to attend lectures, and you had to attend labs and all that. So it didn't leave me. But actually, people used to think that I was probably an arts student, because I was always lingering around in the arts lobby of the Karachi University, every free moment, or sometimes even skipping classes to be there. So it went on, and I was basically a debater and a poet and all that. But in that time, we came to form the so-called, we called it the Young Writers Forum. And we used to bring out I think it's a monthly, probably, by the name Kohkan,
Yeah.
the name of the, and we took
Emma
out.
Salim
No, it
used
was
to-
us as students,
Okay.
us as students, Mujahid and myself and a
Okay.
few other people. One of them is now no longer alive. One of them is now a famous, well-known microbiologist in Australia and so on. So at this time, there was a lot of influence on us of the elders like Withthe Hassan, for example, Muhammad Ali Siddiqui and others, and in the writers, on the poet side, we were very friendly with Surur Barabankvi. Femida Riaz she was like not only a friend in the sense of the poetic group or literary group, but also like a family friend. She was close to my sister, and used to visit us.
Did you show your poems to her as well?
As of course, at that time when we used to recite, not for correction,
Yeah.
it was not that kind of a relationship, but because when we held these poetic gatherings, we of course invited Femida, and when we were sitting together just having tea and stuff in university, he would recite her poetry. So she was an inspirational figure, very charismatic, very attractive.
And you frequently interacted with Withthe Hassan Sahab as well?
Not as frequently as I would have liked to, but yes, definitely. I still remember that, I don't know whose house we used to have sittings on the rooftop, and Withthe Sahab would just pipe and stuff. And we would ask him questions, and he would respond, and he would, some of us spent a lot more time with him. Dr. Jafar Ahmed, if you know.
Had you any chance to meet Faiz Sahab and Munir Niazi, poets like that?
I of course met Faiz Saab in these musharas, but nothing, I can't claim to have had any private discussion with him or any closeness in that sense. But of course we admired him like everybody else. We imitated his, you could say, his style, which was wrong, but anyway, it did leave an impact. And of course, at that time also there were currents which were running against Faiz. When I used to visit Radio Pakistan, there was Qamar Jamil, for example. And Qamar Jamil cautioned me that, take this shadow of your poetry, and this is right, and this is what you're doing. This is your own style, etc. And I'm indebted to him for that anyway. Munir Niazi, I never met him in Pakistan, but I had a very interesting encounter with him in the US. We used to have this Greater Boston Students Association, Pakistani Students Association, I was in the greater Boston area. So anyway, when we had this mushaira, and it was a big mushaira organized actually by the whole association, and they invited poets from Pakistan, and in those, among the others, there was Munir Niazi, and I remember there was Haqi, Charnul Haqi, and there was
Sahiba
Akhtar.
As you told me just before the show.
So I was told to keep an close to Munir Niazi for various reasons. We had some interests or tastes in common. So when and said when if he needs to leave the room, go with him and then bring him back, take care of him, etc. That's sure. So at some point when I think Sahiba Akhtar was just about to read or he started reading, he said, Munir said that I need to go on. I said, oh, sure. So I took him out and then the side ante room, and they said actually I wanted to avoid having to read directly after him, Sahiba Akhtar. And I said, why? He said, well, can you hear him now? I can hear him from even here. Sahiba Akhtar was a loud poet. And he said, I don't want to read after such a loud poet. He spoils my audience. So I'm going to wait here. And after that, let Haqi Saab, he's a nice person. He won't mind it. Let him have his say. And then he will bring the temperature down. And then I'll. So anyway, in those 15, 20 minutes, I spent one-on-one talking to him, Munir Niazi, and trying to probe him on what he felt and what he thought, and I'll take. So that's my encounter with him.
Okay. So what was the environment at campuses in terms of intellectual discourse and other social activities?
That the student politics, by the time we entered it, had begun to fragment the left politics.
And some liberal groups and the right-wing groups.
The liberal groups sort of emerged as a response to this situation.
Okay.
That there was the Jamiyat or the right, the religiously oriented student politics. They were a major group, and they had been winning in Karachi University, for example. And there was so much infighting in the left. Then, as you know, the People's Party came up in that period, which were progressive in certain ways. So all this was going on, and we were losing continuously elections one after the other. But if you were asking me about the kind of atmosphere, there was a fair amount of discussion on international politics and the divisions of the left internationally, and whatever was happening. It was reflected in the discussions in the arts lobby and in the teachers' lounge, as it was called. It was not teachers, but it was us. But as far as the average student was concerned, I think they were not really as deeply involved in these. It was more people like us who were party members, NSF party members or other party members who. But anyway, it was, we used to bring out a weekly or I don't know, bi-weekly newsletter from the NSF, which was very progressive and left-oriented, and it was circulated, it was distributed. So those kind of things were going on. There were people who were totally immersed in the literary activities. They are still out there, many of them out there. Anwar Sin Roy, Shahid Hassan, Fatma Hassan, Ayub Khawar, they were all contemporaries in Karachi University. Kaisar Bengali, as an economist, is well known. Shahid Alam writes English poetry. He's, I think, somewhere in the US. So all these were, contemporary figures. So that kind of thing was going on, and
then you won the elections of Secretary General.
That's kind of, people think when I tell them that I was being some kind of a very active student politician. I was not actually. I told you I was kind of reticent, and I was quite happy to be there for the elections, quite happy to be there in the literary sittings and the discussions. but I was not a, what you call on the stump, raising the. But anyway, I was known that is he is from this side, and he is a committed. When the election time came, there was a condition imposed by the university that you must have cleared all the papers of the previous last exam. In those days, I think we had now entered the semester system, so in the last semester, you could say. So it turned out that all of the real, vigorous politicians, student politicians who were very anxious to run for the elections, none of them had all their papers cleared.
Good for you.
And a couple of those who did have them cleared, they were controversial in the sense that this group faction says yes, so this faction says no. I was probably the only one, and I didn't even know about it, for whom they said, okay, he qualifies. He has a decent involvement, and he's cleared all his papers. So initially I was asked, and I refused. But then I was actually in the physics laboratory, and somebody came and pulled me out and said, you have to come and talk to us. I said, okay, fine. And they said, here's the papers, sign them, please. The time is running out. And I said, no, don't worry about your parents, we'll talk to them. This is not you're no longer a kid. Come on, take responsibility. So I just signed. I said, all right.
So what I learned from this incident is that at that time, being good at studies was a plus point to become a political leader as well. Okay.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I was probably among the best students, but you don't need to be. You just need to clear your papers.
Okay.
This was a condition the university had, enforced, because they were like these professional student leaders who would linger on for almost a decade.
I know about that.
Yeah. So they introduced this thing in.
Okay.
So then if you were lingered on, you could linger on, but then you couldn't contest the elections.
Yeah.
So my being one of the better students probably mattered to some students, but it wasn't really a prerequisite.
How about when did you think that you should publish your book as well, and how about your poetry?
Right. I mean,
you pursued it quite seriously, I guess.
In the period 71 to 77, when I departed for the US for my PhD, I was writing fairly frequently. But that was an age when I was still developing as a poet, still learning. And but even if you look at my book, it runs from the more or less chronologically. So I start from the present and I end. The later portions are the ones which are from my student days. So you can of course trace the development. But then I went to the States and I was involved in my research. That period was very unproductive with regards to poetry. I wrote a very few things. But of course I did mature significantly in that period. When I returned to Pakistan in 1986, and again I was involved now in research and teaching in the university. So again my writing suffered, and I did not publish as much as I probably wanted to. My mind was distracted too much. Then I began to write poetry very seriously from I guess 2010 onwards.
Well, I just randomly opened this page, and this poem is titled as Chaman Mein Range Bahar Utra. It's a famous line of Munir Ghazi. And your title is Kinare Aapka Khwaab, Noon Mim Rashid's line, I guess.
Right.
So it's wonderful that you have acknowledged their poems, and Faisab also used to do that in some ways. So tell us about your poetry, and we would also like to listen to you if you have some English translation of your poems.
As you mentioned, that there are, as I mentioned in fact in the preface to this book, the poets who have influenced me, and I'm never ashamed to acknowledge.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, this is a plus point.
right. So of course, Faisab
Yeah.
was a formative influence, but also at the same time, I felt that the canvas of poetry should be much more larger. And I looked for poets who had a broader canvas. And there I found, of course, Rashid Saab,
Yeah.
Nurmim Rashid, as a person who really inspired me in the sense of understanding that how poetry can delve into the complexity of modern existence. It can deal with such aspects like the whole idea of communication itself. How do you communicate between two people, or how does one person communicate with the rest of the universe? Ideas like that, and of course many other. So definitely Rashid was an influence. That's why the title of the book, as you said, reflects that. I was also found Mustafa Zaidi in that sense to be somebody I learned from. Again, he too looks at modern life, modernity, and he has this the idiom and the language. So I think that somebody I found important for myself. Munir Niazi, I think, is in terms, of course, he has this existential ethos that permeates his poetry, and that the language, the idiom, the atmosphere, I found that very attractive. So, of course, there are nowadays you have someone like Sarma Sahbai. I admire his poetry, like his poetry a lot. So, and of course, then there are many others whom I have not named, but there is Akhtar al-Iman, if you look at in terms of, because I am basically a Nazm go. Ghazal for me has always, for myself, it has been a rather secondary outlet, because probably you could say I'm more of a thinking poet than a feeling poet. The feeling has to be, for me, the feeling has to be coupled with the thought. I am not very fond of purely sentimental or emotional discourse. So in that sense, as you can say, Akhtar al-Iman is somebody whom I find a poet to read seriously. So, many others.
And then you turn to novels.
As you mentioned in the introduction, for the past 8 years, I have been not involved with science anymore in that sense, as a scientist. Not teaching, not doing research. And I deliberately, forsake that line, because I wanted to do things which I had been postponing all my life. That is, completing my collection and publishing it, and writing a novel. Short stories were there. The background to writing the novel in that sense is not just my desire. When I published my first short story, 2008 or something like that, or 6, I sent it to Asif Farooqi, the late Asif Farooqi, who was a great person in the sense of inspiring or encouraging writers, unknown writers like myself. And he was very, affectionate about this, and he said, it's a good story. And we published it with some introduction. But then he talked to me and he said, the style that you have, each character in this story actually deserves his own, you can write a story about each one of them. And if you combine them, it can be the stuff of a novel. And he said that, your style of detail, your style of looking at description says that you can write a novel. And I was happy to hear that. I had at that time no inclination. And then later on somebody also remarked. So So at some point, when I completed or about to complete this, I can't tell you the exact episode. Some personal, some other people involved, some of them are no longer here, in this world. And I felt I owed it to this person to write the story. Not the way it happened, maybe exactly. But so anyway, it was a big struggle to write a novel for me. It was not
I
easy.
can't wait to read it when it comes out.
It's finished now, and I've passed it on to friends, my sister and others, to give their critical comments. So hopefully sometime next year, early next year, I hope to.
Your sister is also a poet, and
Yes,
I think she's also very much involved in Halkar Babazok, New York.
that's right. Dr. Shaila Naqvi is a poet. She has her own collection. She has been published, and a second one, I think, on the way, and a lot of her short stories, etc.
Can you share some of your poems if it's translated into English as well?
Well, I tried something for this purpose. I've never done it before, and I don't know how good a job I may or may not have had done. So it's one of the poems, one of the very early poems in this book. So maybe it's one of the later poems of my life, maybe a couple of years back. Or So it's called The Song of the Seashell.
Beautiful.
Sunset, and the sea responds to the mournful dirge of a lonely flute. The spray showers us both as her fragrance ascends, lingers, then wafts into the distance. In our nearness, the tulip parts, sprinkling gently the colored pebbles of her laughter.
Beautiful.
Beneath us, the sand, a sleepless princess, tosses, turns, and in the twilight, its eyes glitter. Far, far out in the sea, firefly-like, the lights of a phantom ship flicker. I hear the seashells sing, of the sea, the breeze, the sunset, and of the morning flute, as it resounds with the echoes of a lost whisper.
Beautiful.
And yet, as we wait, rises another gust, spreading its magical cloak, enclosing, inscribing one single name to everything all around. I hold her close as the smoldering evening by the seashore silently browns.
Beautiful. I wish more of your poems are translated into English. Take it seriously.
Okay, thank you so much.
Just a question came into my mind. As your experience, you have been a poet as well, and now you are writing a novel. And what difference did you feel between the two genres? Did you think that a novel could give you more space to interpret and communicate what you want to show to the people?
Definitely, novel poetry is indirect communication. Eliot would have called it the art of not, communicating everything. Poetry is not supposed to say everything; it's supposed to hide. But that's, one way of.
Well, it is said about all genres of art, I think.
Yes.
More or less.
Maybe not. Well,
okay.
The way I look at it, of course, you can communicate much more directly in a novel. And of course, the expanse of the novel is much larger. You can have competing narratives describing the human condition as it exists in your time, as you see it. So I guess that is something I wanted to do, to probe the various currents flowing in my time. And I don't know to what extent I've been able to succeed, but definitely, as you asked it, I think the canvas is much larger for a novelist.
And how was your experience writing this novel? Because it consumes a lot of your time, 1 year or even more than that, 2 years or even more, and you are living with that story which is evolving as well at the same time. So, what's this process and how, what was your experience? Was it a process of self-discovery, understanding human lives more deeply, whatever you want to share?
Yes, I think there were two, you could say, different things. One was learning to write as a novelist. I think my first year I spent, I wrote and tore, and I wrote and discarded what I wrote. Then I wrote the whole of 2023 I spent writing, and at the end I found that it was not something which I mean, it was like 3/4 of the novel was done, and I again discarded that. So I started afresh this year, sometime in March, rethought it, and then began writing it. So that's one thing, learning to write a novel. It's not something you, maybe at least, I didn't learn it by writing my short stories. I had to attempt it and then learn the skill. That's one. And then the other more important thing which you asked, that is, do you discover more about yourself? Do you discover more about people? And I think definitely when I began writing this story, there was one central idea which was there, very clear in my mind, that this is what I want to talk about. But the other characters and the other themes, they just emerged. They introduced themselves, and those characters which I just intended to initially have as some characters, side characters, I realized later on that there was something within me which was forcing me to give this character more space, and I gave it.
Yeah.
So that's something which you just discover, that when you write and your writing takes over, in a sense you become its slave rather than you being the master.
Well, thank you, Khurshid Sahab. It was a pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
So viewers, thank you very much for watching us. See you next Sunday, same time.